All right, great. Thank you so much and welcome everybody. This is super, super exciting to have so many of you here today. This is introducing library publishing for LIS students and early career librarians. Thank you again for joining us. We are delighted to have all of you. Oops, there we go. I'm Stephanie Buck. I am your moderator for today. I am from Oregon State University. I'm a member of the Library Publishing Coalition Professional Development Committee. And this webinar is being sponsored by the Library Publishing Coalition and, of course, the Professional Development Committee. I want to thank them all for their support and contributions. As we get started, I do want to acknowledge the LPC Code of Conduct. And if Adam, my good colleague here, is going to be putting these links to these resources into the chat. The Library Publishing Coalition is a welcoming, supportive, and kind community of scholars and practitioners who strengthen each other's work through participation in events and dialogue. LPC's Code of Conduct is intended to encourage positive interaction between community members and protect against harassment and abusive behavior. The code is not intended to shut down uncomfortable but important conversations, but instead to create community spaces that support constructive feedback and growth. And there is a link to the Code of Conduct in the chat if you want to read more about it. So this is really amazing how many people we have joining us today. We are super excited about that. And we would like to get to know a little bit more about you. So on your screen, you will see a QR code that is to a Mentimeter poll. We're going to go through that and allow people to share their place and location of where they're from. And I see that responses are coming in. Ooh, Montreal and Texas, Ontario, Gainesville, Baylor. Yeah, we're not too picky about what you put in. It could be institution, city, state, or country. But we'd love to know more about where y'all are from. I myself am in Oregon, where it is raining again. I know it's an Oregon thing. It rains a lot here. Lots and lots of individuals from all over the country and from international as well. That's so exciting. Okay, I'm going to give it another 10 seconds or so to put your responses in. But we've got people coming from so many places. This is really great. We love it. Library land. I always tell people that librarians secretly rule the world. We just don't like to make a big deal about it. So this is awesome that we have so many people who are joining the club or are already in the club and, plotting world domination. Okay, next question. Oops. How long have you been in the field of librarianship as either a student, librarian, staff, etc., whatever? We're just kind of curious to know how long you've been doing this. Okay, well, I'm glad to see that nobody so far has said, what is Oh, there's one. What is librarianship? That is an excellent question, I think. It has changed so much since the how shall I put it, historic days of when I was when we used to call it library school. I don't know if we still do that or. Christy, 21 years. Wow, that's awesome. They recognize people, here at my institution who've been here for, a long time. It's like, I've been here for 35 years. I'm like, wow. And then I realized I've been in librarianship for like 25 years. So like, oh, wait, when did that happen? Okay, another second or two. Oh, I've got people with some good experience here and a few newbies. This is exciting. All right. Well, we hope that we're going to be sharing a lot of useful information with you. And finally, one more quick question here. How exactly involved are you in library publishing? I am not familiar with it. I am familiar with it, work in it. I should be teaching you this. All right, the two, three people who've answered I should be teaching you this, you'll be on our next panel. We'll have a follow-up and you will be invited. All right. This is fabulous. Thank you so much for your participation. This was all in fun, so don't worry about it. But it's nice to know who we are and who we're talking to. So I'm going to return back to my presentation here, if I can get that started again. There we go. All right. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists for today, because frankly, that's why you're here, not to hear me talking. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Paige. Do you want to say hi?
I do. I'm so glad to be here. So glad to see so many people interested in library publishing. And I'm not going to repeat just what's on the slide because time's a wasting.
Thank you, Paige. And John.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming. This is going to be fun. Library publishing is a great part of the publishing ecosystem. So glad that you're going to learn something about it.
And thank you, Nicholas.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Wojcik. Thank you for having me, and I am very glad that all of you are here. Welcome.
Jordan.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Jordan Peterson, and I'm a librarian at the University of Guelph in Canada. And similar to the other panelists, I'm excited to be talking with you today.
And last but never least, Marianne.
Hi, I'm Marianne Reed. I'm the Digital Publishing and Repository Manager at the University of Kansas, and I'm just thrilled to be here, and I'm really anxious and excited to hear what my colleagues are going to be saying and what your questions will be. So, yay, publishing!
Woohoo! Thank you so much, panels, and we're going to hear more from them in just a few moments. Before we do that, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and talk a little bit about what we mean when we say library publishing. It's an activity of academic libraries to support the creation, dissemination, curation of scholarly, creative, or educational works. Library publishing often requires a production process, presents original work not previously made available, certifies the content whether through peer review or branding. It is distinguished from traditional publishing by preferring open access, and we can talk about open access more in a moment, informal and experimental forms of scholarly communication, and challenging the status quo. Open access, I'm going to put a definition here into the chat. So that is just a little bit about library publishing and what we mean when we say library publishing. So let me give you just a few quick examples so we can move on to our fabulous panel. Things that libraries publish. We have, for example, journals. There are libraries that publish journals either from the institution or maybe in association with a professional organization. And some have journals published by students as well. Textbooks, which is what my institution does, open textbook publishing. This is an example from MSU. And that would be textbooks that are being made freely available to students and under an open license. That's very popular these days because textbooks, as we all know, are super expensive. Then we have books or monographs, as we like to call them in library land. And these could be usually are published by written by the faculty at the institution, but could be also from other folks, Oxford University Press or something like that. You'll know those university presses, those library presses, when you see them. So here's an example from Illinois. This is an example of a repository from Purdue. So a repository basically, and which is what a lot of libraries are involved in, is a way to gather the scholarly communications that are published or produced by the institution. So that could include things like articles, reports, conference proceedings, student scholarship, dissertations, theses, all kinds of stuff. So you'll see a lot of universities hosting repositories. And then there can be library and press collaborations. Usually there may be an example here is from the North Broad Press. It's a joint publishing project between Temple University and the Temple University Libraries. So they have both a university press as well as library publishing. So those are just some quick examples of the kinds of library publishing that happens. And so now, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. My bad. There we go. Let's get to the questions for the panelists, because this is going to be the good part, right? All right. And as you go, I should have mentioned this earlier, please do feel free to put questions into the chat. We'll have a Q&A later on, and we will be keeping an eye on all this and let you know. And in any of the panelists who want to pop a response into the chat, please feel free to do so, because we're very excited about that. Okay, so questions for the panelists. Question number one was, why do libraries publish? And I'm going to call on Marianne to get us started.
Hi there. I think libraries publish for a lot of different reasons, but the starting of these kinds of smaller library publishing programs happened a lot in the 90s when library budgets were getting squeezed by commercial publishers who were charging a lot of money to have people be able to access scholarly research that had previously been published by societies. And so I think that's a big thing. There was a practical reason. There's also kind of an idealistic reason in that we are really trying to return academic publishing back to the academics, to get that back in the hands of the people who are producing and volunteering all that volunteer labor, as we know. Get it back into the hands of the people that are producing it so that we can do interesting and great things and not have to be constantly having to worry about that we won't be able to pay for it.
Thanks, Marianne. And I should note that Adam has put a link to Marianne's article about why libraries publish into the chat, so you can go and read that. John, why do you think libraries publish?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think fundamentally, libraries over the past, I guess libraries have always been service organizations to a large extent, but I think libraries have moved to a more active service component. So not just like ordering books and ordering journals, but providing services to the community, and that could be a lot of different things. And publishing is one of those things. So, if you compare, for example, to a university press, maybe at the same university, the university press isn't really providing necessarily a service to the faculty and students at that university. I mean, they are extending the university's mission, certainly, but they're sort of more commercial, and so library publishers are able to go in and say, we'll help you do journals, we'll help you do open textbooks, and they're not expecting necessarily a return on investment always, although there are different models. But I think that's mainly it from my perspective, is the service side of things.
Thanks, John. I want to follow up on something, if I may. You mentioned something about the mission of the library and the institution. Can you talk a little more about that? How does library publishing fit into that mission?
Well, I think that any good library publishing program would first take a look at the university's overall strategic plan and mission. And most universities have a strategic plan that's published somewhere. And so I think a good library publishing program would look at that mission and try to align as much as possible with that mission. And I think that's pretty easy to do. But if you see like the 4 or 5 or 6 strategic priorities of the university, the library publishing program is likely to be able to contribute to all of or most of those strategic priorities. So I think that's kind of where it starts right there.
Any other follow-up comments from our distinguished panelists?
I guess I would just say that I agree with everything that Marian and John said, the whole notion of putting research back in the hands of academics and more than the sort of, I can't think of what the word is, I don't want to say stereotypical, but more than just buying books and resources and actually producing books and resources. So I work in an academic research university where the mission of the research university is on research output. And so therefore, like what John was saying, the library in these situations will often align themselves with the research university to routinely publish original scholarly research because that fits nicely within the mission of a research university. And with that, there's an opportunity for students and staff and faculty at the university to be a part of that or play a role in that process, either serving as authors, being part of, serving as peer reviewers, etc. So there's a whole opportunity for them to be part of the cycle.
I agree with Nicholas. There's a direct service component to your university, whether it's providing opportunities for people to be editors or authors or whatever. You're directly involved with the faculty at your university and beyond. So that's really true.
And I think if we take it back to the initial question of why libraries publish, I think that library publishing programs also have an opportunity to publish journals or other resources that are focused on topics or fields that may be underrepresented by big or for-profit publishers. Whether they be journals that benefit teachers or practitioners in areas of education or science or other things that may only be glossed over or only touched upon in other resources.
Thank you, Nicholas. I want to actually hold questions until the end, but I do think there's an important question coming up in the chat here that I just want to clarify, or I'm going to ask Marianne to clarify. How's that? We have a member of the audience who's a little confused about, so what does it actually mean, like when we say library publishing? Are libraries as a group publishing or as individual libraries? How does that work?
The answer to that is probably yes. It's kind of both depending on the model, but what I think of when I think of library publishing, it's a program within the libraries that help people publish things in a very basic and non-elaborated way is what I guess I'm thinking. But how the people group themselves in order to do that really varies from publishing program to publishing program. Sometimes it's more than one library, sometimes it's just one library. It really varies.
Yeah, can I add to that? I think, sometimes you mentioned repositories, and I think frequently it starts with that. University has a repository, and it's a book that they're putting stuff in, and then they start to help people learn how to make stuff for that bucket to put stuff in, and it kind of grows from there. That's a simplification, but I started a program at George Mason University doing this, and it was a hybrid library publishing program and university press, and maybe we'll get to that later, but it had elements of both. And it was small. It was a very small boat, but we were doing all those things you mentioned earlier. We did books, we did journals, we did open educational resources, and again, it was a hybrid of different things, but it was, basically service oriented.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, and I think hopefully that will help clarify some things. And that is, what do you do as a library publisher? What is a typical day like? And Paige, I'm going to go ahead and have you unmute and tell us about your day.
Okay, I'm first going to check and make sure that having switched my mic, my sound is clear. If I can see, I see some thumbs up. Okay, so I'm a department head supervising people who do some of the data work of library publishing, but I'm also doing it myself. At this level, at this point, that often means thinking about the infrastructure. That might mean the software, such as Pressbooks, that we're using with our OER publishing program to help faculty develop volumes of OER. It also includes our institutional repository, where we are publishing items from our digital collections and publishing in the sense that we're making it accessible, scholarly publications that have often been published in formal peer-reviewed journals, but we're making open access versions of them available. It is, well, many of the people in this webinar could talk about the day-to-day work of doing that communicative work with authors, faculty, researchers, people who have material that they are publishing, and that work is so important. And I want to give a shout out to those of you who are more interested in the back end side of this, who are interested in the technical infrastructure around library publishing, because it's really important to be supporting that too. Some of the things that I'm doing are working with our head of library IT and working with central IT to make sure that our infrastructure is meeting the technical requirements of the university so that the infrastructure and the things that we publish stick around and stay available. This also includes thinking about digital preservation. I know that people like to say, oh, if you put it on the internet, it'll be there forever. Alas, this is not true. This is not true at all. And finally, I am always working on helping people who get into library publishing, whether intentionally or because they just sort of fell into the role, to develop their confidence and develop their skills, because we're always trying to grow the field of people who are actively feeling like they have a role here. And I want to give a shout out to everyone who's asking really great questions in the chat, because this is how you get in. And there, I'm going to put a cork in it.
Thanks, Paige. Nicholas, what's your day like?
So I work for the University of Oklahoma library system here in Norman, which is part of the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. And we have, I'm part of a department called the Open Initiatives and Scholarly Communication Unit. So we have myself, who I'll talk a little bit about what I do in just a moment, but we also have an open educational resources librarian who helps publish OER, and a institutional repository librarian who works primarily on our institutional repository. And we are also getting ready to roll out a campus-wide open access policy, so we're very involved in that as well. So as far as what I do, I lead in the development of the Open Access Journal publishing program here at OU Libraries. So OU Libraries not only pays thousands of dollars per year for subscriptions to professional journals and makes those resources available to students, staff, faculty, and researchers, but we also publish journals that are exclusively open access. So there are no fees to read any of the articles. All you need is access to the internet. There are no fees to authors, which is very different from many journals, which ultimately require authors to pay to publish through what are called APCs, or article processing charges. So that's not the case with the journals that we produce. These are peer-reviewed publications. I know that there was a question in the chat about peer review. They also adhere to best practice guidelines in journal publishing. And one caveat is that they have at least one University of Oklahoma faculty member serving on the editorial team at all times. So that helps with sustainability and having a sort of connection to the university. So the program began in 2015, and we currently publish nearly a dozen open access journals covering a range of unique and often underrepresented topics, primarily in the social science and humanities fields, such as forensic social work, higher education athletics, performing arts, race and ethnicity, early American politics, young adult literature, just to name a few. So I am really involved in overseeing the successful publication of those resources. So typical day involves working on short and long-term projects that assist journal teams in the development of their journals. So right now, for example, we have a couple of journal teams who are who have a lot on their mind regarding artificial intelligence. So I'm helping them find resources that can help them in developing an AI policy that complements their plagiarism policy. So lots of reference work. We just got done upgrading the platform Open Journal Systems that we use to publish our journals. So with any sort of technical upgrade, there's always lots of troubleshooting and these sorts of things. So there's a technical component to that. We're responsible for DOI registration. So for those who are not familiar with what DOIs are in the audience, DOI, or a digital object identifier, can, I guess, simply be looked at as a almost like a permanent URL, if you will, for that resource. So that helps ensure that they can be discoverable, and we have a preservation program in place that helps ensure that those journals continue to be accessible for the long term. I don't want to take up all the time, but lots of other things. We worked with our marketing and communications department here on campus to help promote journals. We work with journal teams to get them indexed in relevant resources such as the Library of Congress ISSN portal or the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is sort of the go-to index for discovering open access journals. So lots of different things, and that's just a real brief snapshot of what some of those day-to-day activities are.
Thanks, Nicholas. In the interest of time, I am going to go ahead and move on to the next question, but I do encourage all of our panelists to put into the chat a little bit more about their day-to-day activities. But I think Paige brought up a good question about, or a comment about skills and learning skills. So what skills are required to be part of the library publishing community? And I'm going to go ahead and start with Jordan.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I noticed at the beginning, folks had kind of a range of experiences from brand new all the way up to being in libraries for decades. So I think that I'm going to speak at this a bit of a high level. But the kind of three main ones that I would say are really important are organizational skills, troubleshooting skills, and then also that outreach and people skills component. So organizational skills come into place because oftentimes, as you're kind of getting a sense of this, many of us are responsible for a variety of publishing activities. We're not just focused on one book. We're usually focused on, we have some open educational resources, we have some journals, we have a repository. And so there's a few different things going on all at once. And so keeping track of where all of those projects are, if you have service level agreements or contracts with anybody that you have to keep up to date, all of that sort of stuff is very administrative, but being on top of that is really important to ensure that the library publishing moves successfully and also acts as a real alternative to commercial publishing, where they have staff that are paid to exclusively do very specific tasks and usually are publishing at a broader scale. I mentioned troubleshooting because, just like Nicholas said, a lot of what we do is providing access to software and infrastructure as well. And so sometimes that means troubleshooting a workflow concern for a journal editor. Other times it can mean a platform might be down, or maybe DOIs are not properly registering the metadata. And so it involves some technical troubleshooting. And then lastly, the outreach and people skills is because library publishing is such a wonderful thing. And I find that once people start participating in library publishing as editors, reviewers, authors, they really like it, but actually getting that out to faculty, to students, and to other people that would have access to our services is a bit of a slog. So you just have to kind of keep at it and to have those kinds of people skills and to really focus on outreach. And then to very quickly answer the second part of this of how they are acquired, for myself, I'll answer a little bit more about this later, but most of these are on the job learning skills that I've had. It's certainly nice if you have access to formal training opportunities. And I think John shared the LPC pathway for starting a library publishing program. Like there's great resources out there, but a lot of skills can be acquired on the job or are transferable skills from other employment experiences that you might have.
It's Jordan. Marianne, what skills would you recommend a person hone to be successful in library publishing?
I would first +1 everything Jordan just said, because that's absolutely true. The people skills are very important, the being able to connect with people and to listen to them. I think adaptability is a great skill that one has to have, because I know that sometimes I will have a thought about this is the way my day is going to go, and then everything goes and it suddenly has to change, and I can't spend that time that I was planning on doing something. So adaptability is really important. Being opportunistic in terms of selling your program, because you might hear a faculty member talking about, gee, I wish there was a journal in blah, blah, blah. And you say, well, we have a program where we can support you for free. And then let's get together and talk about it. Let's have coffee. So that's a big thing. And I really think it's helpful if you have some user support skills, like tech skills, because as Jordan was saying, a lot of times what we're doing is we're not only supporting the process, the editorial process, but we're also supporting the infrastructure. And so knowing when to get help, who to talk to, those kinds of things, that's really helpful. The one skill that I found is the most helpful, besides the ones that Jordan mentioned, is knowing how to do a reference interview to figure out what people really want. Because a lot of times they'll say, I want this thing, this little teeny thing, but what they really want to know is something else. And so being able to have the skills to talk to people and say, well, what are you trying to do? How can I help? How can I do things? Really helps a lot, because you can clarify things. And even if you have to say, no, it doesn't work like that and we can't do that, at least you are showing that you value their opinion, that you're connecting with them, that you are listening to what they are saying, and you're trying your best to help them. And frankly, that's really important, because publishing programs need advocates that are not in the program itself. We need people outside in the university who can speak up for us, because all it takes is a change in the presidents or the chancellors or whatever, a change in the library director. All those things could put a library publishing program in danger. And so having other voices and cultivating that through these connections is very, very important, because you need to have other voices who can speak up for your program if it's in danger. And danger sounds very dramatic, but you know what I mean, that if it may be going away or changing.
Thanks, Marianne. Any other skills any of our other panelists want to throw in here real briefly?
I'll just mention one thing. I would say professional organizations and listservs are really a great outlet. They provide a lot of opportunity for skill development. You can find out about conferences. LPC, for example, has their biweekly newsletter that goes out through email, or other sort of connections to community forums, blogs, or just people posing very real day-to-day questions that can, help give you some peace of mind or a new frame of thought about library publishing.
That's great advice. Thanks, Nicholas. I think professional development in that sense for folks, particularly coming into the profession, is super, super helpful. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about what excites you in library publishing. John, what gets you going?
Well, like I said before, I think there's a lot of energy in library publishing that's, works that are not necessarily commercial in nature, but nevertheless very valuable. So an example of that, many libraries support student journals. I've been doing a lot of work in the student journal space. And this involves both graduate journals and undergrad journals, and both literary journals and research journals, and library publishers are not the only institutions supporting that space, but they're often the primary place in a university supporting these types of initiatives. There's a lot of variety, but that's one thing that's, I think, exciting. And then I want to make one other point. This could probably be a complete webinar of its own, but I think library publishing is both a career in its own right. You could definitely have a career, just in library publishing, a valuable and rewarding career in that, but it's also can be a stepping stone into other areas of publishing, such scholarly publishers, nonprofit and for-profit and university presses, but also like museum publishing. So for anybody kind of interested in publishing as a career, library publishing can be a good way to start in that, maybe as an intern or an early career person. But not to say that you have to move on from library publishing, because that could be its own destination.
Thanks, John. Paige, what is it that currently excites you about library publishing?
Well, good question. I'm going to emphasize first the growing energy that I've seen around open educational resources publishing in the last several years, and more generally, the understanding since the start of the pandemic that people need access to our resources without being able to travel to the specific library or archives where they are. A lot of terrible things have happened. There is still a lot of work to be done, but I feel like I'm seeing energy in the right direction. I'm also going to say that particularly in the US, well, but everywhere, we are in the midst of some rough times for academia, and I wish that we weren't. And at the same time, I feel like there are going to be opportunities there to help people understand the role of libraries in publishing and making resources available that have not always been easy to make clear to people before. And I feel like we are really lucky in this large community of practice to have, for the fact that librarianship attracts people who are sharp and energetic and who want to make a difference and want to just jump on things. And I think that there are going to be opportunities for us to step into the breach and do some important work in the next few years and have that work be seen.
Thank you, Paige. I'm going to go ahead and move on because I do want to get to an opportunity to answer Q&A questions, but I really appreciate that the panelists are putting their thoughts and comments into the chat. That's really, really super helpful. So how and why did you get started in library publishing? Jordan, I'm going to go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I think it was Marianne put in the chat that most of us just fall into the work, and I think that that is true for me. So I've been a librarian now for about 6 years, and the majority of my time I was a metadata librarian, and I worked with e-resources, and I really liked the work. I liked the technical challenge of it. But then I was kind of looking for a change. And one of the things I realized I was missing was I wanted to have more community connections. Sometimes that metadata work was also kind of lonely. And so then when I saw my current position being posted, it was nice because it combined some of those technical aspects with also more outreach and more engagement. So when I was interviewing, I relied pretty heavily on those past experiences with metadata. I relied a bit on my coursework because I had taken some copyright courses. And I was like, okay, I think I have a skill set that would be valuable here. And I've really enjoyed it. I also saw earlier in the chat, somebody asked about, are there positions that can be virtual or hybrid? I would say that also is very dependent. So for me, I'm a librarian, and so I get a really flexible schedule that I'm sometimes in person, sometimes remote, whatever works under our collective agreement. But there's all sorts of library publishing positions across different bargaining units, different skill sets. And so there will often be jobs that just seem to bring together some of the skills or interests that you might have. And so for me, I just wanted to emphasize that like you can get started in library publishing from a variety of entry points, but also too, those roles that you go into in library publishing can also look very different. So I'll turn it over. I think there will be another panelist give their feedback on how they got started as well.
Indeed. Thank you, Jordan. Nicholas, how did you get started?
Good question. So I mean, my road to library publishing was in some respects serendipitous, I guess you could say. I got into libraries about 15 years ago. I went to library school with a focus actually on archives and special collections, and would later go on to work in those environments. And so I was primarily working with historical records and cultural artifacts, which really presented a very wide set of challenges involving copyright and licensing and access. And it was a component of the job that I was particularly drawn to. And then there came a point where I began writing about some of the work that I was doing in my job and wanted to share my research and experiences with others. So I started needing to make choices about how I wanted to make my work available, where to publish, who to publish with, and really looking at what my options were and the whole scholarly publishing life cycle and how it works, at least from an author's perspective, I suppose. I had been a member of several professional organizations at the time, including the Society of Southwest Archivists, which supports archivists in the greater southwestern region of the US. And I just remember one day I opened my inbox and there was a call for members to serve on the editorial team for their quarterly publication. And I just thought that it would be a great opportunity to be more involved in the publishing world from an editorial perspective. And so I worked in various capacities on the publishing side of SSA. First as what they call a state liaison on up to the editorial team, and just found it to be a great way to get involved in library publishing, and just and from there took those skills to apply to my current position.
Thanks, Nicholas. Anybody else want to share their path to getting started in library publishing from the panel?
Well,
since I asked.
Career paths are kind of my career path kind of looks like this, but I was in the right place at the right time and was asked to serve. So being open to new opportunities is important. Being able to have skills and maybe be in known quantity if you're in a different role and have expressed interest in library publishing. That's my career path, and it's not a traditional one, but I'm not sure there is a traditional one for library publishing because so many of us have come from so many different angles. I mean, repository and tech support and this and that. And I think all of us are successful in our way because we come from those different backgrounds. So I think that helps a lot.
Thanks, Marianne. And in fact, you got us into our next question, which is, if you could do something differently, what would you do differently? And this is, I think, a really interesting question because a lot of times people ask this in library land and say, well, if you had known about this, what would you have liked to have learned? And it'd be things like how to fix the leak in the roof. That they don't tell you that in library school. So what did they not tell you in library school that you would have liked to have known, Marianne?
Well, first of all, I didn't go to library school.
Well,
I'm a staff member.
I'm sorry. You're just gonna have to leave the discussion.
I'm a professional staff member, but I have had an extraordinary career. And I've worked with extraordinary people, including some of the people on the screen here, which has been amazing. The only thing that I might have wished I would have done, I mean, it's worked out very well for me as it is, but I worked at the University of Michigan for several years, and I should have gone to library school then. And I didn't because there were a lot of other things going on in my life, and I did not. But that's perhaps my only regret. Other than that, all of the things that I've done in my past have contributed to the person I am now and the job that I do now. And so, you know, being open to saying how different pieces of your past contribute to your existing, your current and your future roles, I think it's really important. And it's I'm very grateful for the experience I've had because it's been all over the map. So that helped me a lot in terms of moving forward.
Great. Nicholas, anything you would have done differently or?
Yeah, that's a good question, a hard question. I'm honestly not sure I would do anything different, at least on a major level. When I get a question from a patron about copyright, I'll often joke that I should have gotten a law degree because I'm not a lawyer, I'm a librarian, so I can't give legal advice, but I can help connect you with relevant information. But looking at from the time that I got into libraries and where I wanted to be ultimately in my professional life and where I am now, you know, my career path has definitely taken some unexpected turns, but some might see that as a positive thing where I, you know, perhaps developed a more broad range set of skills than if my career path had been more straight and narrow. So I guess for me, it's not so much about what I would do differently or would have done differently, but rather, I guess I could frame this more as about knowing that there are some things that I had to learn along the way that really required me to take some initiative on and learn and understand and apply in my job. I think that there's a lot of things that you sort of have these kind of epiphanies at the moment that you realize like, oh, I actually did learn that in library school. Like, so for example, getting into library publishing, here I am in a journal publishing program, you can ask a basic question like, what makes a quality journal? And say, go back to library school and say, oh, that's information literacy, you know, or, you know, ways that a digital collections class or module or something can be applied to the field. So I think that that's really more what it's about for me, is just kind of the ability to reflect on the skills that I learned through one means or another, or those that I had to learn on my own, and how they're applied.
Thanks, Nicholas. Anybody else on the panel like to add to that?
If I could just add something. So
Sure.
I run a publishing graduate program, not a library program, but I think this advice that I give my students would apply to any of the young professionals here or mid-career professionals. And one thing is to, you know, to think of your career strategically. I think there's always an element of luck and serendipity, and sometimes we don't know where our path's going to take us, and that's all fine. But you know, spending some time planning, and I think Nicholas or others mentioned, you know, introspection. So, you know, spending some time thinking about, you know, what you want to achieve in your career, you know, where you want to be in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, if you could think that far ahead, and, you know, work your way towards that goals. And I think, again, you know, luck kind of favors those who plan, but you never know, like when you're going to be, I don't know, on the bus at a conference next to somebody who gives you your next job or something like that. But you know, just thinking ahead and making goals, and this has been mentioned frequently here, learning new skills, both technical skills, people skills, leadership skills, all that helps you grow professionally.
Thanks, John. And Paige, I see your hand is up. You want to wrap us
Thank
up?
you very much. Yeah, I want to jump in and say that something that's really important here is speaking up and asking for support and resources. I say this especially for my fellow women and non-binary folks, etc., who are in the room. Those of us, there are a lot, more than the categories who I mentioned, for whom it is easy to be like, oh, well, maybe not this time. Nah, squash that maybe not this time voice and say you want in, because of the always developmental and dynamic nature of library publishing that all of us have been talking about, because it can be so unstable, it's hard sometimes for you to get tapped. So speak up and lift your voice, and there's a place for you here.
Thanks, Paige. That's a great way of wrapping up our panel presentation. Thank you so much, all of you, for your contributions, both in the presentation and in the chat. That's so helpful. And I have asked Nancy to make sure that we capture this chat because I think there's a lot of great information in here. I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience. We've got a couple of minutes. Sorry, I was not able to corral everything, but it's so much good stuff, right? Please note that John just posted into the chat that he's happy to talk one-on-one. He's included his email. So Adam, is there anything that you've seen in the chat that maybe we want to pull out, or does anybody have anything that they would like to unmute or raise their hands?
Yeah, I think there is one question that did not get answered by the panelists during this. And I will say that if there are other questions that you want a fuller answer to, or that I'm missing now, just please feel free to repost them in the chat, or just ask them directly. But I think the one question that sort of didn't get much of a response has to do with kind of peer review and library publishing. So maybe the panelists could speak a little bit about sort of how peer review happens. And the specific question is, do librarians serve as the peer reviewers, or partner with faculty? Basically, who does the peer reviewing when the library publisher offers peer review?
Oh, that's a fun one. Who would like to go? Raise your hand. Who on the panel would like to respond to that?
I think that was kind of answered.
John, okay.
I think that was kind of answered in the chat, but it really depends on the model. But what I see most common in library publishing is that the library publishers are providing the infrastructure and the training. I mentioned this student journal symposium that I'll be having in May, and one of the panels will be a couple library publishers at University of Illinois, and they, provide peer review training to people. So it's usually that sort of, helping others help themselves, I guess, might be a good way to do it. I don't see the library publishers usually doing the peer review themselves, but more providing the means for others to do that.
Yes, Marianne.
And it's more than just, I mean, John is absolutely right. And it's not only the technology that has a good support for that infrastructure of review, but also sometimes we just sit down with an editor because they're saying, I've come to a dead end. I can't get reviewers. What do I do? What do I do? And we will just we will brainstorm ideas about maybe how to reach out to other people, how to find reviewers, maybe different ways the journal could approach their topics so that they would be more attractive to reviewers. It's very different. I mean, we have 61 journals, so they're all different. But being that kind of trusted consultant, not only for the actual equipment and the software, but also for the process. I don't pretend to be a subject matter expert, because I'm not. We have journals that come from all different disciplines. But in terms of being able to say, well, if you reached a dead end, let's try this, let's try this. What other kinds of things have you tried? What would you like to try? What are you comfortable trying? Having those kinds of conversations is really valuable, and that helps them see us more as a trusted partner and not just tech support.
Thanks, Marianne. Other questions, Adam, or would anybody in the audience like to unmute and ask a question? Nancy can unmute you, or you can raise your hand. We're happy to share our thoughts. I know there was a question about the types of publishing platforms that people use, and those were answered, I think, in part in the chat. Pressbooks is one we use at Oregon State. There's OJS, there's DSpace, there's Manifold. There's a whole variety of flavors of publishing platforms that are available.
For those interested in platforms specifically, this is a few years old, but I recommend John Maxwell et al. John Maxwell and others did a report called Mind the Gap on open source platforms, and they looked at like a whole bunch of different platforms and kind of evaluated them. So I could try to find that quickly and put it in the chat, but you can also Google.
Thanks, John. We've got a few minutes left. Other questions, or anybody on the panel want to add anything that maybe they didn't get a chance to talk about earlier? Where would you get started, folks? If you were here in the audience and you were like, "Ooh, this sounds really fun," where would you go next?
So look at the Library Publishing Coalition website, and there's quite a few different resources there. That's a great place to start. Earlier, we mentioned that library publishing pathway. There's an entire library publishing curriculum on many different topics. It's quite extensive, but there's an introduction to library publishing in the library publishing curriculum. So I think that those are all really good places to start. And if you can try to attend the Library Publishing Forum, which is held each year, that's a great place to find out more and to meet people. And finally, I'll close with this. I put this in the chat, but I'll be doing the Student Journal Symposium in May. Welcome you all to attend. We're going to hear from a wide variety of students, faculty, librarians, and administrators that support graduate and undergraduate student journals. So I hope you could come to that.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And I see that Paige has posted the Library Publishing Forum information into the chat. I believe the publishing forum this year is going to be virtual. Is that correct, Adam?
It is virtual and it is inexpensive to attend. Sorry.
Thank you, Paige. Appreciate that. Adam, anything you want to follow up?
There's one last question, maybe a quick
Okay.
answer about funding for where funding comes from for sort of a big question, but maybe how your programs are funded.
Anybody want to?
Sparingly.
Yeah.
Jordan, yes, please tell us about your funding.
I was just gonna say very quickly, I think it's often the case that library publishing is not explicitly funded by like a dedicated pool of money. Often what will happen is that it is a part of either like a unit in the library or somebody's job or whatever. And then often that will be written into library budgets also as in-kind support for specific faculties. That's not the case universally, but needless to say, we're always on the lookout for more money, and often we can get like little grants to subsidize projects, but the ongoing funding is usually in kind or part of the library's services when they talk about their budgets.
I'm going to pipe up
Hey.
and say that it is also really important to be talking about and keeping lists of the good things that your program accomplishes, so that because, as Jordan says, it's not directly funded, if there are threats, you're able to say, here's what we would lose if we stopped doing this, which unfortunately is something that I have had to say before, and probably all of us have.
Thank you, Paige. I think that is an excellent point. It is a little after 10. And I know that our panelists are all super, super busy people. So I want to let you all go and thank you so much for your time. This has been super fun. I've had a really good time watching the chat and all the comments. And we will be posting this, of course, and making the slides available and the YouTube, the recording available. I think most of our presenters have put into the chat somewhere their contact information, noting that they're happy to do one-on-one if you've got more questions as well. And I am happy to do that as well. I do OER publishing. So thank you again and have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Nancy, for your help.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.